A defence alliance between the Nordic countries has been going strong since the Second World War. But more recently, cooperation between the countries has been stepped up. With Finland and Norway sharing a border with Russia, how prepared are the Nordic nations to defend themselves? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, the Nordic countries, Finland, Sweden, Norway and Denmark, have been ramping up their military power since the war in Ukraine started. Finland and Sweden both joined NATO following the outbreak of the conflict. But is the northern flank of Europe ready for Russia's military power?
A military exercise in northern Norway. NATO soldiers go on board an enemy ship. Norway and the NATO alliance have been training like this for decades. More recently, their Nordic brothers and sisters in Finland and Sweden have joined NATO following the invasion of Ukraine.
We have our Nordic friends who are now part of NATO, so we have Sweden and Finland in the fold, and I think that's a good thing. So we need to not only to know about Article 5, who says that, well, it's a collective defense. We also need to pay attention to Article 3, which says you have to take care of yourself first.
The re-elected Donald Trump has cast doubt on how much NATO countries can rely on the US.
I said, if you're not going to pay your bills, we're not going to defend you. And it also went for the attack. But if they got attacked, they said, well, does that mean you won't defend us? I said, are you current or are you delinquent? They said, if we were delinquent, would you? I said, nope, I would not.
While Nordic countries' defense spending is higher than other nations, their proximity to Russia leaves them with little choice. Norway shares a 198-kilometer long border with Russia, while Finland's border is 1,340 kilometers long. Sweden and Denmark have the islands of Gotland and Bornholm in the Baltic Sea, both strategically important. But the Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, says that all European countries need to improve their defense spending.
I'm glad that all Nordic countries and Baltic countries are so supportive, but all Europeans have to step up when it comes to Ukraine and at the same time step up when it comes to defense spending at home. Because Russia is threatening all Europe now, unfortunately.
The cold north is feeling the heat, but will they be strong enough for the fight?
Well, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Milan in Italy, we have Elisabeth Gosselin-Malo. She is Europe Correspondent for Defence News. In Helsinki, in Finland, we have Janne Kuusela. He is Director General for Finnish Defence Policy. And I'm delighted to say here with me in the studio, we have TRT World Correspondent Paul Hawkins, who was recently in Norway witnessing a NATO exercise. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Janne, I'll come to you first. We're seeing unprecedented levels of cooperation between the Nordic countries on defence. I guess it's a case of needs must.
Well, the Nordic cooperation was taken to a completely new level 2 years ago when Finland and Sweden joined NATO. So that has actually enabled us make the most out of our long-standing cooperation and do so much more than what we were able to do before. And as a kind of 5 allied North European nations, we can be a really meaningful actor that supports NATO's deterrence and defense.
And Janne, I've often heard it said that you guys are good neighbours. You get on. There's a very good working relationship. And I guess it's needed now more than ever.
Yeah, we always had a very deep mutual trust and understanding, and we value each other as highly as neighbours. And it's proven to be a very solid base for defence cooperation as well.
Elisabeth, to you, just spell out for us why the Nordic nations are increasingly significant players when it comes to European defence and security.
I think there's a couple reasons. They're looked at as very strong partners because before joining NATO, they were already part of some of the exercises, part of the training that nations did together. I think now yes, today even more than before. They also are very much aligned with their support to Ukraine. They've been important contributors to that. And above all else, I think we look to them for their expertise in Arctic warfare. So anything that touches the Arctic region, they're experts in, of course. And now with that region being increasingly contested, it's more important than ever to have them on board and have them share their knowledge.
Paul, talking of the Arctic, you've been there recently in Norway filming a NATO exercise. Just talk us through what you saw.
Yeah, well, I saw what Elisabeth's referring to, the collaboration and the knowledge that the Norwegians and the Finnish have as well, and how they're passing that on to the Americans. So this was Joint Viking 25, a NATO exercise involving, I think it was up to 9 countries. And the press were invited as part of that exercise for the last 2 days. And when we joined, we were shown probably the most important bit was the Cold Weather Centre of Excellence in Norway, where Norwegian soldiers were training up the Americans. So there were American soldiers there from North Carolina, no experience of the Arctic conditions. Not only what would it be like to fight a war against Russia in the snow, but also how to survive those conditions. So things like when your equipment freezes, how you live in the snow, how you avoid detection by the enemy using thermal imaging. Probably the best example was when we witnessed soldiers being placed into a hole in the ice covered with snow. They've got their full gear on, their guns, their equipment. They're literally thrown into this hole in the ice, in the water, and then they've got to climb out. They've got to survive. They've got to retain this mental strength to then climb out of this freezing cold water and then continue with their training. So it's those kinds of experiences that we saw while we were out there.
And these kind of training exercises, they're not new. They've been doing these in Norway for years, haven't they?
Yeah, they've been going on. Yeah, this Joint Viking, as I understand it, it's been taking place for a number of years. This year was the biggest military exercise in Norway this year, but by annual standards, it was quite small. I'm told next year's will be much, much bigger. I was talking to one Norwegian soldier, and he said what the Americans bring is numbers and sophisticated equipment. And that's, we simply couldn't carry out these military exercises without them. You kind of knew that before you turned up. What was interesting was the knowledge that went the other way, as I've just outlined. So it's not just that the Americans bring everything, it's that the Americans do also learn about how to survive in Arctic conditions from the Norwegians, from the Finnish, from the Scandinavians, from the Nordics as well.
Janne, to you, Finland is almost 2 years now into its membership of NATO. Give us a feeling for what Finns are thinking. Has it been a successful move?
Oh, yes, it's very popular. Still, we just had a poll and asked people's opinions, and it's kind of still amazing to me how quickly and dramatically the Finnish people's opinion changed 3 years ago when Russia attacked Ukraine. And Finns seem to be very happy with the solution of joining the Western Alliance and being part of that group.
No regrets, Janne?
No, not whatsoever. I think this is one of the wisest moves our country has made in security and defense policy for a long time.
Elisabeth, to you, President Trump seems to have really sharpened European minds on defense. In a strange way, should we be grateful to him that, suddenly we're seeing so much cooperation on defense, relationships building, and a lot of people were concerned about Trump 2.0. And yet what we're seeing from countries like Finland and Sweden and Denmark and Norway is just excellent work and really good cooperation.
I think by some standards it would qualify as a poison gift in that I think Europeans have known what they need to do for a long time, but have sort of put it on the back burner. Not necessarily excuses, but taken their time to reach the point of cooperation and sense of urgency we're seeing today within Europe and amongst NATO as well. I think the thing I will point out, though, is that the remarks and the comments that President Trump has made has created a sense of uncertainty amongst allies that I don't think is necessary or needed at a time where they need to be increasingly working together. It sort of created a sense that potentially the U.S. is not as much of a reliable partner what was once thought, I think that's not necessarily reflected on the ground between the countries. We saw the soldiers work very well together, but more so at a high political level, if you want.
Paul, you were there as well. So from what you saw, was there any commentary or did you pick up of any negativity from the American soldiers in terms of NATO membership or working with Europeans?
No, absolutely not. I mean, the question that I was really interested to know how President Trump's approach to NATO, how does that affect morale, 6 or 7 levels down the chain from the commander-in-chief when you're out there? And what I was continually told about, and I was being a bit of a mischievous journalist, asking, how do you feel about President Trump, right? And I didn't, and I can understand why they were reluctant to answer that. But what they kept saying time and time again was collaboration is really important. We love coming here to work with our NATO allies. We want to learn how to fight in the snow, which we can't do in North Carolina. This is a great example of NATO collaboration. And so that's why we enjoy being here.
I guess the soldiers are professionals. They do their job regardless of who their chief is.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, and so some military personnel found it a little bit awkward. Some talked about collaboration. One guy said to me, "Look, we simply don't know what President Putin's thinking." And I said, "Well, Donald Trump says he knows what President Putin's thinking." And he said, "Well, to be honest, I don't really know what either of them is thinking. But until we hear otherwise, we're here to collaborate. We're here to learn from each other. We're here to partnership because we simply don't know if or when someone like Russia could potentially take military action against us. And that's why we all have to collaborate." And I have to say on the exercise as well, there was a lot of, and Janne will like hearing this, there was a lot of praise for the Finns and for the Finnish because they were saying that the Finnish were more aware of the Russian threat because of the history between the two countries, and that actually because Finland hadn't been a member of NATO until very recently, it had taken a lot more put a lot more thought and a lot more effort into resourcing its military properly, which is why their reserves are many, many, many times bigger in number than the other Nordic countries. And that's why the Nordic countries are now playing catch-up.
Janne, talk to me about Finland's worries about Russia then. You share the longest border in Europe with Russia, NATO's longest border with Russia. How concerned are Finns about everything you're seeing from Vladimir Putin's Russia?
Well, I mean, of course, when Putin decided to attack Ukraine 3 years ago, that created a lot of concern in Finland and actually caused us to seek NATO membership. So it has created a lot of concern. And of course, it will have a kind of long-lasting, not only regional or European, but global ramifications, how the war in Ukraine eventually ends. We are a nation of 5.5 million people with one of Europe's largest land masses, and as you mentioned, the largest land border with Russia. So we feel a heavy responsibility in safeguarding and defending that border, and that's what we have focused to do for all the decades ever since the Second World War. And that's, for example, why Finland is one of the few nations left in Europe who still has general conscription, which then enables us to have the large reserves.
That was my next question, Janne. Conscription. Just talk to me about how that works and how does the Finnish public feel about conscription?
Well, it's compulsory for males and voluntary for women, and it's very popular in Finland. I often say that it's the most favored national hobby after ice hockey and cross-country skiing. It has long traditions in our country, and it's deep embedded in our culture and in our kind of national DNA, and it's very well received by the people, and it creates kind of an intimate connection between defense and every Finnish family because your sons and daughters served, so you have a first-hand connection and you have your own skin in the game of how the country is defended. So it works well for us how it's done nowadays. What we are trying to achieve for the future is to get more voluntary women. Their numbers have been increasing promisingly for the past years, but we would still like to have more women in our ranks.
Elisabeth, in some European countries, the mere mention of conscription would have people jumping on social media, people up in arms, people saying, "Not my child." How do you feel about the Finnish way of doing things? Because it clearly works for Finland. Small country, 5.5 million people, and you don't mess with them.
Right. I think that's something in my trips to Finland and to Norway, where there is also conscription, is the closeness that exists between the civilian and the, I guess, military is something that in North America, many places in Europe, is very unfamiliar. And my scene daunting, I actually left those feeling more of safety and potentially wanting to know how I would fight in front of conflict. So I think it's actually a great thing that they've implemented, and to see how closely knit it is together really reinforces the notion that their military is solid and it's always prepared to face a crisis or even a conflict.
Paul, to you, I mean, we're here in the United Kingdom. Keir Starmer would never think of bringing in conscription, would he?
Well, you say that. I think they do want to increase the size of the armed forces in the UK, but the problem is money and how you train up those reserves and how you structure society. I mean, Finland has been doing it for decades, and that it takes a while to build up your trained reserves. I think the thing with Norway is it's got the world's largest sovereign wealth fund. They've got the money, they just don't have the people. They don't need to raise taxes or borrow to fund training reserves to increase the size of their military. So they're in quite a unique position. But the problem is they only have 5 million people, I think slightly less than Finland. And that's why they want to increase their trained reserves to an order of 100,000 at any one time that they can draw on from the population during wartime. But I mean, I was just looking at the figures actually. In 2023, trained reserves for Finland, 870,000. I think that's right. Janne can correct me if I'm not. And then Norway, 50,000. Sweden, 38,000. Denmark, 12,000. And you were talking about gender as well. What's interesting is Denmark and Norway, about a third of their armed forces are female because they have a gender-neutral policy. So that's different, I believe, from Finland. And it's interesting that Finland's trying to pivot more towards having more women in its armed forces, a bit like Norway. But Norway is trying to do what Finland's doing, which is increasing the overall number that's there.
Janne, to you, just give us your impression of your neighbours then. How well prepared militarily are Sweden and Denmark and Norway in your view?
First of all, let me just comment on the size of our reserves. Roughly 870,000 Finns have received military training as a reservist, but our wartime field army is 280,000. That's what we plan to fight with in a case of war. Our Nordic neighbors are very well prepared. I mean, as was mentioned earlier, they are dealing with some issues of hiring personnel and lacking enough numbers of people. But otherwise, they are really modern, well-equipped, well-motivated militaries. And I think our Nordic militaries complement each other very well. We have complementing capabilities that can be brought together. And I would like to maybe single out our air forces as a good example. We have more than 200 most modern fighter aircraft in our inventories who are trained and used to operate as a pack. And it's a very useful tool in these conditions.
Elisabeth, to you, just back from Norway, what do you think the Norwegians are lacking then?
I had the opportunity to have a conversation with the Norwegian Chief of Army. So if I draw from that conversation, it relates to the urgent requirements that they have for the Army branch. I think that came up a lot was the acquisition of new drones, specifically longer range for maritime surveillance. So not only Norway, but a lot of what countries bring to the table is their expertise in maritime surveillance. And so Norway was saying they want to acquire drones that would operate better in Arctic conditions because where they are, the climate is quite rigid. For now, a lot of what they do is American-made drones in some cases, and those were not built to handle sometimes the environment in which they're in. So that was one, more artillery and more as well as new fighting vehicles.
Paul, to you, I mean, we live in strange times, but European countries, defence is topic number one now, apart from economy and growth and everyone trying to get their economies moving. Defence has suddenly shot to the top of the pile.
Yeah, it's top of the priorities now, I think. And so a lot of countries, the UK, Germany, etc. Well, Germany's just changed its fiscal rules so it can spend more on defence and it can borrow more. Certainly the UK is in a bit of a bind. They're having to cut back on spending because they can't raise taxes. They don't want to borrow so that they can fund more defence spending. But this is all being driven by Donald Trump from the States. And I have to say, when we spoke to American officers and Norwegian officers in Norway, when you talk to them about Donald Trump, they get a little bit, oh, what's he going to ask us? You talk to them about defence spending, they go, actually, he's got a fair point. You know, for years, we haven't spent enough on defence. We've left it up to the Americans, and it's time that we got our act together. And so if there is a silver lining to a Trump White House, it's that now we're getting our act together and we're spending more on defence. And we're also not just spending more on defence, we're also, but this will take a number of years, making the weapons ourselves, because you can't just keep buying American. It's not just a case of having more money. We need to actually have the facilities and the companies, the private enterprise in Europe to make those weapons and to, things like ammunition and artillery, etc.
Janne, is there a feeling in Finland, because of your history with Russia, that you've been far more prepared than perhaps many other European nations for the threat of any conflict?
Well, I mean, I'm sure there is a good understanding and expertise about Russia in many European countries. What we have in Finland is an understanding and feeling about Russia as a neighbor, a long-standing neighbor, and we have also been for 100 years part of Russian Tsar's empire before we gained independence. So our sense of Russia comes from this kind of experiences, and that has then influenced our plans and decision-making.
And just looking to the future, Janne, the years to come, I mean, does Finland continue on this path, spending a lot of money, having your reservists, having everyone trained and conscripted? I mean, this is embedded in defence policy in your country.
Very much so. And it's well understood in Finland that it's kind of a deal to be a Finn. According to the United Nations, we have the happiest nation of the globe, which we sometimes wonder in Finland, but that's what they say. But basically, we are very happy with the society and the country we have built for ourselves from very poor conditions. But we fully understand that given the location where we live, it's not a given. So every Finn needs to be prepared to defend it if need be. And that's the basic understanding which we all share in Finland.
Elisabeth, just give us your impression of Denmark then under Mette Frederiksen. How are the Danes preparing and do they have conscription?
I don't know if they have conscription in the same way that Finland and Norway do, but I do know that they've made significant investments regarding how much they plan to spend to increase their defense. Recently, I think it was last they said that they were looking to project $7 billion over the course of, I think it was the next 1 to 2 years, into their defense budget that would rate above the 3% GDP.
Paul, what can we be learning from our friends in the north here? They seem to be extremely well prepared, and we're not seeing that in many other European nations in the south.
Well, there's definitely a correlation between the proximity to Russia and how much populations care about the Russian threat or how realistically they take it. What can we learn from the Nordic countries? Something that Janne said was very interesting, and it sounds trite at first that Finland's the happiest country, etc. But that survey, that recent survey about Finland being happy, it was actually based on trust in your country, trust in your fellow citizen, and the connection that you feel with each citizen. And what I picked up speaking to Norwegians, Norwegian troops, was they're signing up to serve for their country. Would you be prepared to die for your country? It's all very well coming and getting this military training, right? It's great for your CV, looks good, you're learning skills, making friends, brilliant. But when it actually comes to a time of conflict, when you're fighting, say, Russia, would you be prepared to die for your country? And all of them were unreservedly yes. And I think that when you have that connection amongst the society, when you care about that society, when you care about the government and you feel that bond, you're more willing to defend it and to fight for it. And maybe that's something in less happy countries where maybe we don't trust the government, maybe we don't trust society, maybe we don't trust our fellow citizens, are we willing to go and fight for them as much as we are for our country? And I think that's something that we could learn in the UK.
Janne, to you then on that point, how important is trust for a Finn?
Well, it is. I mean, Finland is a very trust-based society. We still trust each other and we trust our authorities and decision makers on a generally higher level than in most other European countries. So that's a kind of a very important component in our security, because in addition to military defense, you also need the overall resilience of the society. And we have this whole of society security model where every citizens, all the businesses, industry, NGOs have their own role in taking care of the security of this country, and that's based on mutual trust.
Janne, we trust your opinion, and Elisabeth and Paul here in the studio as always. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye, and thank you for watching.